I realized on the way over that I forgot to put a map slide in the PowerPoint. So how many know where Chiapas is? Or anybody doesn't know where Chiapas is? Ginger knows? It's the southernmost state of Mexico, and it's right, we live about 3 hours drive from the Guatemalan border. And ECOSUR is a federal research center. We have a graduate program, and mostly our job is research and advising students. Let's see. I think I'm going to skip this remote. Okay. So I'm going to start out talking about a bit about the history of food systems in Chiapas, in particular in the highlands of Chiapas where we live, and how they have evolved from the pre-colonial times, the Maya agroecosystems. There it's mostly Tzotzil and Tzotzil Maya, to the colonial systems and how they began to get inserted into regional and global economies. And then the more recent history of neoliberalism and the food crisis that the whole world has suffered, but that with the particular ways that Chiapas experienced that. And then a little bit about how we think agroecology and food sovereignty can help respond to the situation in general terms. And then Helda will talk about some of the specific initiatives for food sovereignty that we've been involved with and how we see those potentially evolving over the next few years and weaving together in hopefully a stronger fabric, social fabric for food justice and food sovereignty. So let's see. So basically in pre-colonial times, people lived from two kinds of polycultures, perennial polycultures. One is the milpa, which is the corn, bean, squash system, but also a whole host of plants that come up as volunteers in these systems and that people eat as vegetables and also use as fodder for animals. And the others are home gardens, which are even more diverse and tend to be more managed by women, while the milpa might be more managed by men. And this is actually in the Mayan lowlands, and you can see here there's a whole bunch of products from that kind of a system, and including now obviously things that are introduced from other parts of the world like bananas. And these two systems together gave a very diverse and balanced diet, and particularly when you take into account that all the corn was nixtamalizado, which means it was cooked with lime, which makes the amino acids more available. In the colonial area, San Cristóbal de las Casas, where we live, and the area right around it became very important for wheat production because it was sort of a Spanish enclave there. It's one of the oldest cities in the Americas. And they became producers of wheat and bread for quite a large region of the Chiapas highlands and beyond. And it's still important for bread production, although there's very little wheat produced now. And then later on, coffee was brought in, and it became a very important crop. It's considered a traditional crop now in Mexico and Central America, although it obviously comes from Africa. And so it's grown mostly by peasant farmers, campesino farmers, in small plots. These are the kinds of systems that Margarita's working with. And it's grown in mostly in a very rustic way. So basically in forest that's a little bit thinned out with the understory cleared and coffee planted in the place of the understory plants. So it's a very biodiverse agroforestry system. Over the course of particularly the last half of the 20th century, the food systems in Chiapas became increasingly more linked up with international economies, and people become more and more dependent on export agriculture, and also with NAFTA on imports of corn, basic grains. So a lot of the beans that are produced, that are eaten in Mexico now come from my home state of Michigan. A lot of the corn is also grown in the Midwest. So Mexico is, I think, only about 50% self-sufficient in corn now, even though people consider themselves men and women of corn. Coffee has faced a series of crises because of price drops, mostly, and more recently, significant pest problems. The latest thing is Roya, the coffee rust, that is a fungal disease that's come in and really blasted production at the same time that, once again, the prices are dropping at the international level. Because really the prices aren't determined by what happens in Chiapas, but by what happens in Brazil and Vietnam. So in the face of these problems, people are moving around. There has been a massive migration to cities like San Cristóbal and Tuxtla Gutiérrez, which is the state capital. So these cities are growing quickly. On my previous slide, I showed a map of the what San Cristóbal looked like in the 17th century, about 5 blocks by 5 blocks now. And that would have been this central area on this Google Earth image. And it pretty much looked like that up until about 1950. So all that growth that you see there has happened over the course of about 70 years. And it's continuing to grow very rapidly. And at the same time, obviously, people are migrating to other parts of Mexico and farther north. The government's response to these problems has been a program they call Reconversión Productiva. So giving people alternative cash crops, things that they can export. That's the vision, to produce things that they can sell to the extranjero outside of Mexico. And also to provide technological package. So this is a picture of a meeting of an ejido, which is a collective land management sort of organization. And in the background are the huge piles of fertilizer bags that the government is providing them as part of a technical assistance package. And that's a pretty typical scene when you go to these Casas ejidales. You'll see all these inputs from the government piled up. And more recently, we're facing a really rapid industrialization of the food system. So the first big supermarket, Chedraui, came in maybe 10 years ago, and since then we've gotten Bodegas Aurrera, which is a Walmart, Sam's Club, and Soriana. We have now 4 big supermarkets. And people are eating increasingly packaged food. This is a picture from a few years ago of what a typical Mexican diet looked like. And you still see a fair bit of fresh food, but this amazing amount of Coca-Cola in the back now. And all kinds of packaged stuff. And it's gotten a lot worse since then. I think people are typically eating, working people or people who study are going to be having sopanísin, these packaged soups that you just pour on the boiling water, right? And a Coke, and that might be the typical lunch now for people that are out and about. This is a graph of tendencies in per capita sales of packaged food and drink, highly processed food and drink in Latin America. And Mexico is the top line here. So we're going up to over 210 kilos per person per year of highly packaged food and drink products. And so along with that, there's a huge increase in everything, all the things we're facing here in the States of metabolic syndrome, diabetes, heart disease. And Mexicans are becoming very concerned about this. And it's probably one of the things that really is motivating changes in food systems. This is at the same time that NAFTA, among other neoliberal reforms, motivated the Zapatista uprising. Can't talk about Chiapas without talking about the Zapatistas, who rose up in 1994, although they had been organizing for much longer. And their development model, if you want to call it that, is autonomy. No, they want to be autonomous from the central government making their own decisions about how they educate their children, how they feed themselves, their judicial system. And they've made a lot of progress on those fronts, although very patchily and without much outside involvement in the whole process. At the same time, or a little bit more recently, really, this idea of buen vivir. Has anybody heard of buen vivir? Yeah, a little bit, yeah. So this is a concept that comes out of South American indigenous culture, but really resonates with indigenous cultures and campesino cultures throughout Latin America. And the idea is to reject the neoliberal development model in favor of something that's based on a much more holistic vision of human well-being, individual well-being, community well-being, much farther beyond profits, right? So within these new development models, as agroecologists, we think that agroecology has a lot to contribute, right? So I'm assuming that not everybody's familiar with agroecology. Very briefly, agroecology is the application of ecological concepts and principles to the design and maintenance of agricultural ecosystems. This is a definition of Steve Gleasman. So instead of, for example, seeing the plant as living in an inert soil, we see the plant as living within a living soil that's providing its a complex set of nutrients and interactions with organisms that are competing with it, that are facilitating its growth, providing it with nutrients. And as farmers and as agricultural scientists, we need to learn how to manage these interactions. And in agroecological management, we depend heavily on the biodiversity in the soil, in the crops, livestock, and in the larger landscape to provide the ecosystem functioning that keeps the crops productive and prevents production problems. And what really sets agroecology apart from a more conventional agricultural sciences is the epistemology, where the knowledge comes from. Agroecologists recognize that agroecosystems are highly diverse, complex, and dynamic, and so there can be no magic bullets. There's no recipe that we can apply in one place and be sure it's going to work somewhere else. That means that we need to be constantly observing what's going on in agroecosystems, how they respond to management. We need to approach them with caution and with humility. And above all, as scientists and as technicians, we need to approach farmers, campesinos, with respect and humility and look for horizontal relationships, because we recognize that science and technicians, with all the access that we have to international literature and so forth, we have a very broad view of agroecosystem functioning. But farmers have a very deep view of agroecosystem functioning in their particular place where they work. So the hope is that by combining those two kinds of knowledge with horizontal exchange with farmers, that we can come up with a vision that's both broad and deep of how agroecosystems work. Steve Gleasman talks about levels of agroecological transition. I think this really helps a lot to understand what agroecology is. He talks about this as sort of a chronological sequence of transition from conventional to agroecological production. What we've seen is it doesn't necessarily happen in this order, right? But level one is refining current technology and practice to reduce the use of inputs that can be expensive, that can be damaging to the environment and to people. And examples of this are precision agriculture, integrated pest management, for example. At level two, we're talking about input substitution. So instead of chemical inputs, then we're using perhaps biological inputs, maybe biological fertilizer or worm compost that we purchase somewhere. maybe Bacillus thuringiensis for pest control. At level 3, we're talking about redesigning agroecosystems so that we're recovering these healthy ecological relationships in a way that the agroecosystem itself is much more autonomous, provides its own ecosystem services that maintain production, and we're able to reduce the application of inputs dramatically. And then at level 4, we're talking about establishing or reestablishing the relationships among agro-food system actors so that we develop a culture and economy of sustainability. So this is a connection way beyond the farming system itself. And this is says Granjas Integrales Zapatista integrated farms. No? So this is a sort of a vision of agroecology as the Zapatistas are developing it. So obviously agroecology is much more than a science. It's also a set of practices and a movement, and it's we think an idea whose time has come, and not just us, but people at very high levels in the FAO, for example, just held agroecology summit for the first time that we understand was really pushed by the French government and some of the other governments, and obviously there was a lot of resistance from certain others who were nameless. But this is a statement from just this year from the new UN Special Rapporteur for the Right to Food, who's a professor from UC Santa Barbara, I think, and she said, agroecology is a traditional way of using farming methods that are less resource-oriented and which work in harmony with society. New research in agroecology allows us to explore more effectively how we can use traditional knowledge to protect people and their environment at the same time. So very high level recognition and support for agroecology. But of course this comes after a lot of work by social movements like the Via Campesina, for example, who in 2007 held a summit in Nailini, and I can't even remember what country that's in. Mali, thank you. Defining food sovereignty as the right of peoples to healthy and culturally appropriate food produced through ecologically sound and sustainable methods, and the right to define their own food and agriculture systems. So there are several key elements of this. One is producing food for people, not primarily for the global commodity market, valuing food producers, localizing food systems, local control over resources, and building skills and knowledge within the movement, and also working with nature. And the Via Campesina has, in the years between this declaration now, gradually in its different member organizations and in the umbrella organization as well, adopted agroecology as the way forward for agricultural development for these farmer organizations. And now I'll hand this equipment over to Helda.
Dress up here. Looks like a mouse trap. I'm worried to. I don't know how to do it. So, Bruce and I came from a biology background. So in our first years at ECOSUR, we started working mainly with the ecological aspects of agroecology. I was trained as a integrated pest manager, and so my research in the past had been mainly on biological pest control, and Bruce was working on restoration ecology and also how to use cattle ranching as a way to restore forest. So for many years we focused our research on the ecological aspect of agroecology, but thinking about how we could scale up what we were doing by one hand, and in the other hand, a little bit by opportunities, we start working with some initiatives in Chiapas that made us this question how we can scale up by farmers, by agroecologists, and by some chefs. So it's diverse in terms of what we do, and also ethnically diverse. And we do several activities, like for example, the last meeting that we have was Yo Amo Pozol. Pozol is a beverage that is made with tortilla dough that it has been a little bit fermented. So it has a lot of probiotics, and unfortunately is now perceived as as a drink that only poor people drink. And the kids, before they go to school, many times if their mom had put a bottle of pozol with them, they drop it before they enter, and they try to get some money to buy a Coke. So we thought that we needed a campaign to make the pozol popular again. So we had this march around San Cristóbal de las Casas, and each person that was willing to try a little bit of pozol then could pose for us with the T-shirts in many languages to celebrate the pozol. We also had this year a walk in the woods to collect and learn about the local mushrooms and how to prepare them. Sometimes we go to schools and we teach kids how to make tortillas and the chemistry of the nixtamalization and why it's so important. And sometimes we go to the fields of the farmers who are associated to the movement, and we help them harvest, and we learn about how to produce the milpa. So far I think that our convivia is one of the biggest one in Mexico, and is getting a lot of more and more attention. We also are working on urban agroecology. As Bruce was saying, San Cristóbal de las Casas was founded by the Spaniards, and when they went to Mexico, they brought with us many of the vegetables and trees that they grew in Spain. So in the traditional patios in the downtown, we still found some of the apples and pears and quince and peaches, prunes, plums that they brought with them. And that's one of the questions that we have, that maybe some of those tree varieties are unique now in the world, because maybe in Spain and in the rest of the world they had already disappeared. They also, it's very common to have chickens in the backyards. Now that the houses have been changing and they don't have a backyard, people have chickens in their roofs. And so even if when you walk in San Cristóbal de las Casas, you won't realize that all this agriculture is going on, because we have these big walls made with adobes, and the houses are covered with tejas, with tiles, and you don't see what is in the backyard, but a lot of food is produced in the city. And because of the Zapatista movement in the 90s, the city also attracted a lot of foreigners that wanted to support the Zapatista movement, and they now decided to stay there. So there's also a different kind of urban agriculture going on now in the roofs, like this one with raised beds in a terrace. So we have been studying how the different agents of biological control move around these gardens. And we got inspired by a friend of us who was really missing his pumpkins from Rhode Island. And so he brought these seeds, he planted the pumpkins, and then he read that in order to get fruit, he had to get the pollinator, that is a beetle. And he was saying, oh, how in my roof I'm gonna get those pollinators, and it's gonna be so hard to be pollinating my flowers hand by hand. And so he didn't sleep that night, and he went into his roof the first thing in the morning, and he opened the flower, and there it was, the beetle that pollinates the pumpkins. So it's we are really curious to learn then how those beneficial insects move in a matrix of cement. And so some of the Bruce's and students have been documenting how also pests move around and how predators and the parasitoids of those pests move in this cement landscape. And mainly we have learned that it's very important to have corridors of natural vegetation so that those natural enemies will get to your garden. And my students have been approaching urban agriculture mainly from a social perspective, and they are trying to understand why someone wants to keep an orchard of pears in the backyard while they could build an apartment and charge some dollars to the students that go to San Cristóbal or the visitors. And it has been very interesting to learn that for many people to preserve an urban garden in San Cristóbal is a question of identity. Like an urban farmer that had a plot of 5 by 5 meters vegetables, he said, I decided to start growing my herbs because the people from Mexico City come here and they try to teach us how to speak. And they, for example, when I go to the grocery store now and I ask for culantro, they said, cilantro you mean? And so I'm tired of that and I want to plant my culantro. So nobody will tell me how to talk. Some other people decided to maintain their orchards in a way to contribute to nature. They said, the government is always telling us that we need to plant trees, so here's my pear tree. And they don't talk too much about the economy or about the gardens as a source of food. That's very, very interesting. And one of my students learned that despite that there's so much urban agriculture going on in San Cristóbal de las Casas, people are not connected. And there's very few exchanges of seeds or knowledge in the area. So she had this idea to form a network of urban farmers in San Cristóbal. And so for the presentation of her thesis at ECOSUR, she invited all the farmers that she interviewed, and they decided to discuss the idea. And so now we have this network that is called Sembrando Jovel, and we have had several meetings, and people decided that what they want to do, first at all, is to party. So to get together and to exchange food from the gardens, and also they want to exchange knowledge. So far we have had a workshop on how to compost in small spaces, on how to manage the soil with a slope, and I gave a workshop on how to learn learning how to love your bugs at the garden. So far I think that there are around 70 families involved in Sembrando Jovel and very active in the workshops. And for a while we start working with the market, with the farmers market, we realized that it was very difficult to change how people get their food and what they get when they go to the grocery store. Even some of my colleagues at ECOSUR in the agroecology department had always excuses why they were not going to the farmers market. Like, it's always on Saturday. There's not enough parking. They don't have enough fruit. So I need to go anyway to the grocery store because I eat mainly fruit. And, or they were discussing about how the NAFTA is destroying our corn production in Chiapas. But then I asked them, this is very interesting what you are talking. Yeah, we really need to do something at the political level. But where are you buying your tortillas? I have never seen you buy tortillas at the farmer's market. So, and it's the only place in San Cristóbal where you can get real tortillas. So that means that you are eating maseca tortillas. So explain me that, please. But we learn little by little that it's very hard for us to make changes in our food habits. So we start working with schools, with children, and to give them some workshops. And then we developed this program that is called Lab Vida, Laboratorios para la Vida. And the idea is to bring back these ideas of why it's important to cultivate the land, why is the importance of farmers, what happened when we decide to buy food from industrial sources for our bodies, for our environment, for the farmers that live in our area. And how we are doing it is by training teachers. So we work with teachers from preschool to college and how to use a garden as a tool to teach science, to teach nutrition, to teach agroecology, to learn about traditions, local traditions. So the curricula for the teachers is to learn a lot about local foods and why it's important. As I said, the basics of agroecology. And so they come to San Cristóbal for 120 hours to be trained, and then we visit them in each of the schools to give them follow-up and give them advice, to be with them at the garden. And also sometimes we meet at San Cristóbal again so that they can exchange ideas and their experiences with the garden, and also to orient us on how to follow up with our own research. So far, we think that we have been successful because we have been able to graduate 2 generations of teachers trained for the school gardens. So that means about 40 or 45 teachers, each of them with a garden in school in Chiapas, mainly in the highlands. We learned that that grown-ups also can change their food habits if we don't preach, but if we give them information. So we teach them how to read labels, to understand the cycles of food and where they come from, the dangers of pesticides. And so when we ask at the end of the program, what have you learned from Lab Vida, they all said it has been mainly a learning process for myself and my family. Now I don't get that much food at the grocery store, and I'm trying to produce a garden in my own home, or I bought locally. So that has been very, very inspiring. We also learned that in order for a school garden to succeed, that it should not be a burden for the teachers, that they are busy enough already to have another program in the schools. So it's very important that they match the school garden with what they need to teach anyway to the kids in the schools. And we learn also that in order that for a program of school garden program to be successful, we need to make connections with the community inside the school, so that a lonely teacher is very very hard to maintain a garden. So she needs to make connections with the other teachers in the area, or with the cook, or with the person who is the janitor, or the families. So if we don't do that, it's very, very hard to maintain a garden. We also learned that they need to be connected in a network. So we had been organized these meetings, the Red de Huertos Escolares, a network for school gardens, for 5 years now. And it's a way for teachers to exchange ideas, materials, and especially to have moral support, to know that they are not the only ones working for a better nutrition for their kids, and to promote local and traditional agriculture. We also are going to have, for the first time, a regional meeting in Chiapas for teachers that want to be connected, and they are planning even to visit them, to visit the schools so that they can see what the other teachers are doing. And so with all this experience that we have been working in the past 8 years or so, we think that we have had some success. We are very excited about all these programs, but now the question is how can we duplicate or increase the impact of programs like this all over Chiapas? And so looking at what the Via Campesina says about how to make food sovereignty the mainstream, they said that first we need to base our agriculture on agroecology, but we need also to be sure that people have access to the land, that people are organized so that they can have access to land, to agroecology knowledge, to government support, and of course that the government support is key in order to have food sovereignty as our mainstream way to produce and to consume food. So looking at this, we have been asking, so how our programs have contributed to this and what is lacking. We have been focusing a lot on consumption. So we add that to the Via Campesina model because it has been very, very focused on rural areas. So first we think that it's very important to have this link with urban people because now we are the majority in the whole world. More than 50% of the people live now in urban settings. So it's very important to add the consumption. But in our case, for the farmers market, for the school gardens, and for the urban agriculture, I think that the people that we work with have access to the land, so they have the agroecology part because of the tradition and also because of all the exchanges that we have provide. In terms of organization, they are organized, but in the small groups. So that's something that we need to work with so that they can get organized with other groups. And also, and this is negative. As Bruce was saying, all the government policies in Mexico are like against sustainable agriculture or against sustainable food systems. So that's the question. How are we going to get that there? And some of our partners said, well, it's impossible. We are not going to be working with this. So we are going to do the rest as a guerrilla movement with a lot of small projects. Then one day they will get together and start the revolution. But what our next step is right now in this picture is to ask this question, how we can build a critical mass for scaling up agroecology in Chiapas? And what are the critical connections that we need to make in order to achieve that? So we had already started and gave 2 steps. One is that we designed a doctoral program on agroecology and society that will start this coming January. And the idea is to bring students from all over to be trained and to be on research on how to document agroecology and in a broader definition, not only in the ecological basis, but also taking into account how it plays in the society. And we also just hired 3 new faculty members for a project that is called Scaling Up Agroecology. So these 3 new faculty members are very young, and they have a lot of energy, and they just start this September 1st. So this is some pictures of our students that are already involved in the graduate program at ECOSUR, where we offer an agroecology class, and we also offer a food system class. And pretty soon we are going to start also with an international urban agroecology course that we are collaborating with people at the University of California in Santa Cruz. So the idea is that first to focus on urban agroecology, but also that in order to spread and scaling up agroecology, we need to collaborate internationally. We need to be able to work with multidisciplinary groups. So we got some funding so that 4 students from California will go down to San Cristóbal de las Casas and do research there in our urban gardens. And 4 students from ECOSUR will go to California to do also a research in around Santa Cruz. But they mainly would learn about how to interact with each other, to understand what the limitations are in each country, to do research, to learn about culture, and especially on how to deal about someone who is different. I think that without that, it's very, very difficult to scale up agroecology anywhere. So it's a very small pilot project, but we hope that it will grow up, and hopefully one day we'll also be able to come and sample bugs here in Vermont. And the emphasis of this Scaling Up Agroecology group and the 3 new faculty members that we just hired will be on education, on sustainable food markets, and on policies. They are still thinking about how to approach this big problem, and the first step that they are going to take is to do a review on what has been successful, what has been done, what has not been successful. So after only 2 days of being here, I think that Vermont is a very good example to study. What makes people go and ask the government to have a war against Monsanto? That's something that needs to be documented. I'm sure that someone is already documenting it, but it's going to be also interesting for us to learn and understand how we can really work with our policymakers. And what it has been interesting is that despite I told you that our little groups are not organized and that they don't talk too much about each other, like things are occurring organically. Recently, someone put together this festival where one of the teachers that participate in our school garden program was part of, a graduate student from ECOSUR also gave a talk, and this group of Mujeres y Maíz, who are part of the slow food movement, put together this festival. So it seemed that organically also these little groups are getting together and hopefully making a big change in our food system. So I would like to now to take your observations or your opinions and questions. Yes, Yolanda.
So it was interesting for me to look at the markets and vegetables that were displayed at the stands because they're remarkably similar to most of what the world is eating. So are those for the Europeans that are going to those markets, or is that kind of reflective of local tastes now in Chiapas?
Well, yeah, both. Many of the people that live in San Cristóbal are from elsewhere. I was saying at the beginning, San Cristóbal grew very, very fast. And because of immigration from Mexico City, from the rural areas, but also because of a lot of international migration attracted by the Zapatistas, mainly. So that's one of the reasons that all the vegetables that you can see here is like a farmer's market in Vermont, isn't it? The other thing is that I need to admit that most of the consumers in this farmers market are outsiders, people who are agroecologists or foreigners, and also because many of the local food is still grows everywhere, so that people can just collect them. But it's changing a little bit. And now they are placed in a more central location, so it's more visible, and more local people are coming to the farmers market. And also there has been a lot of work at the farmers market so that they will offer local food. Part of the certification process, we have this rule that 20% of the area, I think, I can remember the number, 20% of the area should be planted with local varieties of crop to promote. And also sometimes they organize cooking classes so that even the foreigners will learn how to prepare chipilín or all the greens that we normally eat there.
Yeah, that's huge for me, just because I think when you're looking at kind of native versus exotic plants, they have really different connotations in terms of kind of how ecologically you can manage the pests, for instance, because the entire diversity around those plants may differ quite a bit. So it seems like that's kind of a culinary and a kind of an educational component that may be important to kind of put in future programs.
Yeah, that's why we put so much emphasis on that in our slogan Convivia. So to rescue all the recipes and vegetables from the milpa. Yeah. I don't know if you want to take this, Bruce. Okay.
I'm interested in knowing the conversation around that 20%, how challenging or not it was to choose that as a target, and more specifically around sort of if local community-based sort of in situ seed conservation is cost prohibitive, and how we as consumers in America can actually support that. Now that last part of the question is kind of opens up a Pandora box of things, but it's sort of what I've been trying to brainstorm for a long time. And I'm not there. And I can support certain things going on here, but I think I can also support what's going on there in many respects. And I think that the consumer here plays a role in that, actually, like a more direct link role, similar to coffee, but anyway, yeah. So the 20% target, what was the conversation around that? Did that feel like a long shot or no? And do you all aim to continue to increase that number? And if so, does it seem like it's going to be a financial difficulty to do that?
You mean the 20% of the farm to be planted with local varieties? That was just something that we threw out of our pocket because we don't have any idea on how much it could be available, but it was a discussion with the farmers, and so we talk about, and they realize how important it is also for them to produce their own varieties. So it was like a compromise of what the consumers there want, and also how much of the land they could plant with these local varieties. But in fact, we haven't documented if is that a good amount or it should be more. We don't have any idea. That's a question that we had in mind all the time. Like it was like just like a magic number that we decide. I don't know if you want to add something about that.
Maybe that a lot of the vegetables that people traditionally eat, as I mentioned, are things that come practically as volunteers. They're not even planted. No, they're coming up in the milpa when it's traditionally managed. No, now that the milpa has been converted to a monoculture of corn, then you lose a lot of that biodiversity through application of herbicides. So I think that one of the things we need to look at is if we manage to reconvert those systems to a more traditional polyculture, is that stuff all going to come back by itself as a volunteer, or are we going to have to aid its recolonization? I think a lot of it is still in the landscape and probably will recolonize easily enough. And the other thing is, with it, when we get into questions of what's native and exotic, it always gets really complicated really fast. And so here, Helda talked about these traditional fruit varieties that really come from the colonial era in San Cristóbal, no? But those are considered traditional varieties now of San Cristóbal, apples and pears and so forth. And so there's interest in conserving those and bringing back those traditions, even though they're exotic species. But I think that we were just talking about this with Ginger on the way over here this morning, that I think that seed systems are a big challenge right now, because people are looking for traditional varieties to plant and to use, and there's nowhere to get them. You can't buy them. There's one place in Veracruz that is producing traditional varieties, and they have a catalog. But I don't think there's anywhere in Chiapas that does that on a commercial level. We have a friend that has a farm, but it's maybe a hectare, where he's producing some seed to share with people. But that's about it. So I think it's a bottleneck now, and it's something we need to address.
Yeah, and in terms of what the relationship between what is going on in Chiapas and the consumers here, one thing that we think that could work, it's with coffee, because everybody drinks coffee, and and many of them, I understand here, comes from Chiapas because of the influence of you. So unfortunately, coffee has taken over a lot of the good land of Chiapas, because the government pushed and had gave support to coffee plantations and not to produce food, with the idea that people will get cash, and with that they will be able to buy food. So many of the coffee growers are dedicated completely to grow
Yeah, we have a friend, Peter Rossett, who was involved in some of the, well, who's talked with the campesino organizations that were involved in the negotiations and that were privy to some of the, what happened with the government negotiations around NAFTA, and basically Mexico kind of gave corn away. It wasn't portrayed that way, but it was basically gave up on any pretense of being self-sufficient in corn. And that's definitely made life very difficult for traditional farmers, because there's U.S. corn is basically dumped on the market there. Yeah.
One thing that is interesting is that the people who migrate to the United States are in a sense subsidizing agriculture in Chiapas. We did some research on what the impact of the money that it sent back. Remittances. I never know how to say it in English. Las remesas have on agriculture in Chiapas, with the idea that they will be buying more pesticides because they have cash, or that they will abandon agriculture because they will have money to buy food. And surprisingly, it's not the case. People are investing that money of the remittances on agriculture. So they are paying more labor for the neighbors that haven't migrated. They are also, and interesting, they are not buying pesticides, or at least they are not buying more pesticides than the ones that don't get the remittances. So it's very interesting. And in one case, people told us that when they came to the United States, they learned about the environment and how important it was to take care of the environment. So they start to send more money to plant trees in the communities in the northern part of Chiapas. We also learned that in one community that was mainly a coffee production place, because of the crisis, they migrate mainly to Alabama. And with the remittances, they start to plant corn again. They still maintain the coffee plantations, but they also are planting corn. And they said that before that, there was nobody in the community to buy the corn because they didn't have money. And so they preferred to go and buy somewhere else. And so they start to plant corn and beans. And now with this money from the remittances, the whole community is improving the economies and also the way that they are eating.
We've also heard some anecdotal evidence that women are playing a more major role in farming in these communities that have been expelled migrants to the U.S. And that the women farmers are more focused on feeding their families and less focused on producing a commercial crop, so they might be more disposed to agroecological production.
Yeah.
Where else are they going?
We just learned 2 days ago that they come to Vermont. No, there's a lot of Chiapanecans also in Michigan to harvest cherries. There's a big population of people from Chiapas there. And in Watsonville, for the strawberry production in California.
There's some seasonal migration within the U.S. too, for picking different products from Texas to the Northeast to Michigan and back down, something like that.
We learned from not from Chiapas, but from Guatemala. We met some families that live in Michigan, and that was very, very interesting that they went there to pick up cherries, but they were based in Alabama. And so they migrate at the end of the summer. They went south to work there I don't know what they plant in Alabama. And so the farmer, the owner of the orchard, of the cherry orchard in Michigan, asked them to stay because they make all the accountings, and they realized that they were spending more money on the trip back to the south, and that the children were missing school. And he said, I don't have a job for you during the winter, but you can use the trailer, you can stay here. I'm not going to charge you for that. And they didn't want to stay because they went to Alabama to plant corn, as they did in Guatemala. And they were worried that that corn would not adapt to Michigan. And so, they really wanted to eat the tortillas, as they did in Guatemala. But finally, the owner of the orchard gave them a piece of land, and now they are cultivating the milpa, as they did in Guatemala. So they are also illegal seeds, because they brought the corn, the beans, the squashes, and the greens, all the spontaneous weeds that grow in the milpa and we eat, also were brought to Alabama, and now they are in Michigan, and they are commercializing those greens in the Grand Rapids grocery stores. So like mustards and
Nightshade.
nightshade. Yeah.
You mean they're generating revenue in the wintertime? I mean, sorry.
Yeah. They are planting the corn for their own consumption, and they are selling the greens that grow under the corn at the grocery store for other Guatemalans that live in Grand Rapids.
Do you know the name of that enterprise?
Well, it's a family of Guatemalans that live up in in Michigan, and I think that there are like 3 grocery stores that sell Guatemalan produces in Grand Rapids. Okay, so thank you very much for the invitation. And